when they did the math on the paper savings, just, talking about how it affects their bottom line, they were like, this is meaningful to our company. Not only is it going to save time, but literally tens of thousands of dollars invested in paper can, be allocated elsewhere.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Startup Wisconsin podcast, a show where you can learn about Wisconsin's growing tech scene through stories of startups, founders, investors, and the talented people making it all happen. Today, I'm talking with Lonni Kieffer, a co-founder and CEO of SmartCert, a company that's digitizing the complex world of supply chain documentation. Think about every bolt that goes into an airplane. It needs a complete birth certificate of documentation, proving where it came from, how it was made, and that it meets safety standards. For decades, this has been a manual, paper-based headache. SmartCert is building a platform to automate and digitize these critical processes, and they've grown to over 3,000 registered companies. But what makes Lonni's story interesting is the journey from Phoenix, Arizona to Green Bay, Wisconsin, going against the typical startup migration pattern to find better work-life balance and tap into Wisconsin's manufacturing expertise through their partnership with Titletown Tech. We talk about the challenges of digitizing decades-old processes, the change management required when entire industries need to evolve, and why sometimes the best startups reflect the DNA of where they're built rather than trying to replicate Silicon Valley. So let's jump into my conversation with Lonni Kieffer from SmartCert.
So if you think about a bolt that ultimately ends up in an airplane, not only do they have to document what metals that bolt was manufactured from, but what was the process that it was manufactured to? What are the standards that it followed? That paperwork accumulates along the supply chain. You start to build a birth certificate. And ultimately, as that bolt gets received by a Boeing or an Airbus, all of that documentation is required to not only determine that it meets the standards by which the industry is regulating it towards, but that it can actually be put on an aircraft and sold to someone like Delta Airlines or American Airlines. So that process for many, many years and still in a lot of respects is paper-based and manual and really cumbersome. And our goal is to create a network that not only makes the exchange of that documentation better, but it also helps remove a lot of the bottlenecks in the internal manual effort, remove errors, and automate steps for each company.
In your role specifically, like what parts of the business are you focused on and I guess hoping to like make improvements on and things like that?
Yeah. So it's funny because when you think about these workflows, it's multi-departmental. So even from the way that your suppliers send documents to the way that maybe the purchasing department requests them, the quality department has to review them. Maybe it's the sales team that are sending them out the door. We certainly affect all aspects of the business, which usually means that this initiative is pretty big. And I think where we differentiate ourselves as a software partner is the fact that we can help stand in as a project manager, even though we work with companies big and small, from the beginning to the end of the supply chain, they all have the same processes and goals. So we've built this blueprint. So understanding what does your process look like now and defining where SmartCert comes in really helps foster that transition so that you're not forced to figure out software at the same time of, making that transition for everyone that's involved.
Yeah. Do you ever run into instances where like you think a certain organization would be a good fit, but then you just find that there's like so much friction and so many bottlenecks that like you really aren't ready yet? Like, here's what needs to happen. And how do you talk about it with them? Like, what does that look like?
That's a really great question. And the conversation has changed a lot too. I think as a startup, you want to embrace everyone who has the same objectives. And then you very quickly realize if they're not ready, it's not going to work as well, if at all. So I think we have a lot of questions that really help us understand readiness. And it probably involves all decision makers on the call. Is this a priority and an objective amongst the stakeholders in the business? Is IT going to push back because it's new technology that they have to manage? Usually they're happy to hear we're a SaaS platform and we can check the box there. But we started with, those that are really tech forward in the industry and moved into the fast followers. And now it's everyone else that knows they need a better process and may or may not be internally ready to do so.
On the outside looking in, I don't work in the industry specifically. You just think it can't be that. It's not that hard to deliver this item to my house, build that thing, put it here, put it there. What is something that maybe within the industry, especially specifically that you deal with, that maybe seems really simple, but is actually a lot harder to execute on when you really look at it and get into it?
Yeah. I think it is just like I was saying, if our goal is, because we're having a hard time hiring, or we realize that we're spending way too much time on paperwork, and we really need to automate more processes, that seems fairly straightforward. Let's get rid of the paper coming in the door and the paper we're living with and going out to customers and make that digital. But you're really at the mercy of your suppliers. So you have to actually have a conversation with them if they're sending paper. And then, like I said, that workflow affects so many different people and departments that even if, let's say, quality is excited because their review of the data in the documents could be digitized and automated in a way that removes a lot of the manual steps, maybe receiving is hold the phone. If we get digital documents in, now our whole process changes, right? And so it's almost like you have to make an agreement to come together. And you don't necessarily have to transition your entire process from receiving to what goes out the door. And that's usually the smart place to start is, where's the greatest opportunity, the lowest hanging fruit in that process? Which departments does it affect? Start there and then kind of crawl, walk, run your way into transitioning that workflow across departments.
Yeah. I'm actually really curious about the origin of building this platform, this product. Maybe touch on, I'm sure there's some history there, obviously, in the industry. How did it kind of just come to life and fall into place?
Yeah, Lyndon's really good, my co-founder, at answering that question because he basically lived the problem. He was in sales in aerospace and electronics for first a manufacturer and then a distributor. And for him, he recognized as the front lines with customers that most of the time he was wearing a customer service hat because they were upset about something regarding the paperwork. And, for him, obviously it affects him personally and financially, but for the business as well. Because this is a consistent problem, how do you differentiate yourself? How do you strengthen your relationships and eliminate this challenge when you have renewals coming for contracts? So I think the conversation then, he searched for a solution and there wasn't any. And now, 6 years later, we know why. It's really hard to build something industry-wide. But, it's exciting to also approach the industry with a solution. And, we started so simply. Let's get paper out of the box. And where we are today, the conversations are so meaningful and so fun to just see the light bulb moment. Wait, you're doing what? And that's based on just the feedback we've gotten from our customers, understanding, again, where the greatest impact will be to time and resources. And I think Lyndon has a lot to be proud of. We built a really great team that, our head of technology lived in the world of accounts payable. So his familiarity with digitizing documents was also just a slam dunk for us. But yeah, we've grown and evolved in a way that I think is making the impact Lyndon was hoping for.
Yeah. Has talent been a challenge at all? Like you talked about the experience recently with that individual, but I was kind of curious, Like if there's been like, we haven't been able to find the right person, or it took a long time to find that right person, or anything like that?
Yeah, we were lucky with our head of technology. He responded to a LinkedIn post, which I think is like a great story in and of itself.
Yeah.
But, I think because when you're small and scrappy and scared, you almost want to lean on the people you know. And so he was able to hire someone that he'd worked for in a past life. I hired someone on my team that I just know was like gritty and scrappy in a way that we needed. But now we're getting to the point where we're growing to and hiring people that aren't necessarily within our circle of influence. But, SaaS companies, they're a dime a dozen. There's a lot of people that understand that B2B concept, but also understand the B2C piece of it because you're engaging with users as well. So I think that there's a lot of talent out there. It just comes down to the culture fit. When you think about how critical each person is, if there's only 9 of you.
Yeah. Actually, I have a random question about like the culture. Is that something that you have talked about as a team, like saying, hey, this is the type of roles we want, the type of people in those roles. Here's how we think as a group. And like, how do you guys kind of like stay aligned in those philosophies that you agree on? Because I'm kind of, especially with co-founders and, different folks in leadership, sometimes, obviously there's headbutting that can happen occasionally. So how do you guys handle that? Or do you have an external partner that helps with that kind of stuff? Or is it kind of like we kind of been luckily being able to manage it on your own, I guess? Yeah.
Yeah. We had the benefit of Titletown Tech helping us in that regard.
Ooh.
So they have entrepreneurs in residence. We spent time with Aaron Kennedy, who's the founder of Noodles and Company. Like, that was awesome. But he basically was trying to help us define really the backbone of our company in a way that's going to help create a foundation by which to hire, from. Do you meet this criteria? Do you solve problems the same way? Do you respect your team members in the way that aligns with our goals and objectives? That was really difficult, especially, you have so many ideas and you really kind of got to build it into a pretty concise working statement. So I think that took us a few months, but it became part of the interview process. You know which questions to ask, which priorities that you want to convey, better understand the experiences they have, the way they approach conflict. That'll help kind of guide and inform us if they're a good fit ultimately.
Yeah. That's actually a good segue into, I wanted to ask about your transition from being in Phoenix to coming to Green Bay. It seemed, from what I can have read about your history in SmartCert, the company, it seems like you guys were there for quite a while. So what was like the thing that was like, we're going to move to Wisconsin? Was it, Titletown Tech? Was it, family? Was it other thing? I'm just kind of curious. Obviously, you don't have to get as personal as you want to, but whatever you'd like to share with that transition.
Yeah. It's always a good conversation starter when you talk about the fact that you moved from Phoenix to Wisconsin, because everybody does it the opposite way.
Yeah.
But so both Lyndon and I grew up in the Midwest. So we obviously spend a lot of time as we could. Phoenix, Arizona has been good to us. We were there for almost 2 decades, and there's a lot to love about the desert. And it's also like the out of sight, out of mind. So if you just think about leaving behind the 4 seasons and winters as you know it, it's nice to have good weather for a good portion of the year. But you don't realize how much you miss green things and water. I feel like it's just in your DNA that's like a peaceful part of your existence. And so we started to think, as our kids kind of were at the age where we could make a decision to move where we wanted to go. Being back around family certainly checked the box. Being back around, lakes and forests and 4 seasons was part of that. But Titletown Tech was also a factor. They have been with us from the start. We enjoyed our time when we did visit. and thinking about where we wanted to take the company in the next few years really helped us kind of make the decision to move to Green Bay.
I feel like in Wisconsin, and I would say the Midwest as a whole, I feel like there's like this trend of a lot of founders having more of a family focus. Like, yeah, they're building something incredible, but they don't like do it at the cost of maybe building and growing a family. And when you think about like Silicon Valley and other places, it's very like, the hustle and, I don't have time for relationships. I don't have time for family, like whatever that may be, which, obviously innovation happens in different ways. But do you feel like that's kind of like a strength that like Wisconsin and the Midwest has, where it's like our mindset around building businesses without sacrificing like family and relationships? Do you have any thoughts around that? Because I just feel like that's something where like, hey, I want to build a startup, but I also want to have a family. Where should I do it? Like, does this make sense to me?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I think you really hit it. There is a more focused work-life balance here. I mean, it really is a personal preference, and maybe there's an ebb and flow to that for sure. Yeah. We needed that for our sanity. There's a lot of noise, in the big cities that are also distracting. So it's almost like coming to the Midwest in a small town affords you the ability to reset your priorities in a way that are going to kind of help take care of yourself and each other.
Yeah. Was there any hesitation around like things that you would miss? Obviously, the maybe it was warmer, but like you said, I also too grew up near Lake Michigan in the UP. So like I know what you mean by like when you go. My sister lived in Phoenix for a while, so I'd go there and I'm like, "Where's the water?" But like, did you have any hesitations around just moving your whole startup, the leadership team of the startup basically to Wisconsin? Like is like there's different variables there where it's like, okay, finding the local talent like we actually can meet with in real life more often than not. Just anything with events within your industry, things like that. Yeah, were there any hesitations along any of those lines?
There definitely was. I mean, it gives you pause to make a decision like this, because not only are, you making it for yourself and your family, but it does affect a company. And there were some advisors that were worried that you're leaving, this hub. What does that look like from an exposure and an opportunity perspective if you're in, northern Wisconsin? But to be honest, everything that we were afraid of, including winter, was really unfounded or minimal. When you're part of a small community like Green Bay, you find that you have more opportunities to get more involved in a lot of the foundational networks and organizations that either are inaccessible or you're just too overwhelmed on where to spend your time in a place like Phoenix. Mm-hmm. So I think we have been able to realize a lot of benefits in being part of a local, smaller community and taking advantage of the resources, the conversations, that exposure. Titletown Tech plays a huge part in that as well. I mean, their level of expertise, the network that they've built, from Wisconsin and across the globe is also advantageous for us to be closer to.
Yeah. How did the introduction to Titletown Tech happen? Obviously there was some local ties back to the area, but what was kind of like the conversation there?
Yeah. So we were introduced to them during our seed round of financing back in 2021.
Okay.
Because of their focus on supply chain. So it was a really nice connection for us. The fact that I grew up in Wisconsin, I'd like to think helped. But they saw the potential, they understood the problem we're solving and the potential of the kind of impact we could make in the industry. And so they were our lead investor and have been just great partners since the beginning, and especially now that we are under their roof.
Yeah, I'm actually curious around kind of like maybe the first few months with Titletown Tech and now what it looks like today. Like, how has the journey with them, like, and how they support you evolved a little bit?
Yeah. They participate in our board meetings, so they've always kind of been under the hood in a meaningful way, see a lot of the details, have really great discussions and perspective. That started out of the gate, but I think now that we are, down the hall, Lyndon's in the office a little more than me. We kind of divide and conquer.
Yeah.
But, Craig will walk by and ask, how was the Paris Air Show you were just at, or come meet this congressman that's, going to spend time at Titletown. Like, I feel like they're more woven into our day to day in a way that we're top of mind for them, but they're also top of mind for us as we're thinking about the next step, or, how can we leverage their experience, or do they know someone? I think just tapping into their resources, it's a very different experience today than where we started.
Today's episode is brought to you by Headway, a digital product agency based in Wisconsin. Do you need to design and build a world-class user experience for your software, but feeling like you just can't get there on your own? That's where Headway comes in. We're the folks who help ambitious startups and enterprise teams bring their product ideas to life through design, development, and product strategy. We don't just give you user interface designs and leave you to figure out the rest. We work with you and your target customers to create beautiful user experiences, build scalable design systems, and provide Silicon Valley level talent to get it done right the first time. Whether you're launching a new software or just looking to add features, we've got your back. We've worked with startups in industries like logistics, healthcare, fintech, and edtech, helping them solve their biggest software challenges. And here's the thing, no matter how complex your product is, we can help you gain clarity and get the job done together. We're so confident that we'll be the right fit that we offer a 50% money back guarantee if you don't think we're working out within the first 45 days. Ready to see how we can help you and your team? Just head over to headway.io and book a free consultation today. Now that you're here in Green Bay, or just Wisconsin in general, because I've seen that you guys go to like different conferences and trade shows and things like that. Do you feel like there's an opportunity for Wisconsin to do, or maybe I'm just not aware of them, to do something along those lines where it's like, hey, how do we create some kind of experience or conference or I don't even know what, it could be like a retreat. It could be, some kind of unique experience to get folks that work in the space that you're working in together to have more meaningful conversations around, here's how we should be thinking about approaching the problems that we're facing, or like just mapping out together, like, yeah, we all have the same problems. How do we work together to innovate on something together? And as a state in Wisconsin, or as a city in Green Bay, how do we kind of show others like kind of like the ropes of like how they can do things to innovate? Or like, do you have any thoughts on that? Or I wish Green Bay, or I wish Milwaukee or Wisconsin had this or that.
I feel like there's a lot of moving parts to that. And I feel like Wisconsin does a really good job. I was part of the economic summit last year. They definitely have the pulse on what they bring to the table versus other states. They're driving a lot of technology, the co-innovation lab that Microsoft just launched down in the Milwaukee area. And then you have Titletown Tech up here. I feel like they kind of have representation in a lot of critical ways that are supportive of the conversations that are helping lead industries. I don't know how it comes together from a supply chain perspective, but I can say Titletown has done a great job, not only creating ecosystems and conversations for startups, but also, putting a pulse on where supply chain exists today and where it's going. So for me, at least from my perspective, Titletown Tech seems to be a great center point for a lot of that. I think that they're going to continue to invest time and resources to bring that to life.
Have you been collaborating more with manufacturers or supply chain organizations in Wisconsin a lot more now that you're here? Or what has that experience kind of been like?
Yeah, I'd say a few things. It's nice to get in the car and have a conversation with our customer base. That happens a lot more now because of what Wisconsin brings to the table from a manufacturing perspective. There's a lot more to learn in person. I mean, as much as Zoom checks the box, even going behind the scenes, understanding the way their warehouses are organized. I played around with hot heading, understanding the complexity of what these companies do on a daily basis and having exposure to that and listening in a way that you can't really do in an hour, on a video chat is really helpful. So I'd say that's been a really great opportunity for us to take advantage of and leverage. And then going back to, just the manufacturing focus, all the companies, the investors in Titletown Tech have a good understanding of our business. So the exposure that we have and the resources that we have are all companies that live this on a daily basis. That is in and of itself extremely valuable for us to be able to take advantage of more so now that we are local, just like they are.
It actually makes me think about like what, maybe not even just in Wisconsin, just what you've seen in the industry. I'm curious what other companies that you look at them, you're like, oh my gosh, that is such a huge problem. I'm so glad that they're trying to fix it with their solution. Can you think of one off the top of your head that you're like, that's a great thing that's going to help the industry a lot?
In manufacturing and supply chains, or just
I guess either or. Yeah, I'm just kind of, because obviously like you're in the weeds with like a lot of these processes, workflows, documents, and I'm sure you're like, oh, that would be a super fun problem to solve. Or like, if that got fixed, like that would be amazing. But that's not our space, or like, oh, we don't have time for that because, we're focused over here. That's kind of what I mean. It's like,
This sort of funny that you mentioned that, because it's a conversation we're having. We kind of understand on a granular level what every company's goals are to work smarter, faster, better. But on an industry or supply chain level, that could mean things like for aerospace, we want to get rid of the risk of counterfeit parts entering our supply chain. So while we're focused on building this network and creating a lot of visibility and traceability now that we're building data instead of sharing pictures of data, it's a bit far off. Our goalposts are further, but those are the things that we do understand we have the opportunity to solve for by building this network on data. So all of a sudden, if a lot was introduced where, it was manufactured a year ago with 1 million parts, those were all distributed, and all of a sudden a new, 500,000 parts are released. Could we flag that and let the industry know? Could we validate people that are signing off on documentation so that it's like a know your customer? Could we add a level of security as these documents get exchanged in the supply chain? Those are the conversations we're having today. But to your point, it is part of a shift for the industry that's going to take a lot more time than what we're accomplishing on the company level.
Yeah, actually, it rolls into my next question really well, too. This has been happening a lot in our conversation, I feel like. So you've shared that you've grown SmartCert to over 3,000 registered companies. Congratulations. That's amazing. What have you learned about rolling out like an AI enhanced tool into these traditional industries that deal with things in the real world all the time, like, tangible items that are moving from A to B to C to D?
Yeah. I think our commitment and our responsibility is to use AI to continue to solve problems, right? There's a lot of companies and startups that are trying to just use the flash and the fun to get attention. But what we have built will benefit from AI in a way, like I mentioned. If we can generate data, and instead of someone taking out a drawing of a part to compare the requirements of the way that the bolt's manufactured, we could probably do that with an AI compliance check. Compare this to the industry standard, highlight what's out of conformance. Those are the areas that we are building because it's an obvious next step. I think the other responsibility we have as a tech company is we're hearing a lot of chatter like, we all have to embrace AI. And that can be overwhelming in and of itself. Companies understand that there's benefits, but they don't necessarily know how to go from, as you say, A to B. So I think education is a key piece of that. Leading with AI may be beneficial, but so much of the power of that works on the back end, right? Like it's really built to power systems in a way that is meaningful. And then there's also counterintuitively to the conversation of we need all the benefits and want to embrace this. There's the people that are like, my data and my IP, and I'm never touching that. And so we have to educate both sides of that conversation so that there is a good understanding of how you proceed and how you're protected.
Yeah, it seems like change management is like, and we were talking about that before, and how you've been speaking about it more personally on LinkedIn and stuff like that. How has that experience been, on a personal level and professional level, working with all these different individuals at different companies with different backgrounds, with different priorities? You're talking about IP, you're talking about data. This is our stuff. Like what has that been like for you? Do you feel like your role has even evolved a little bit because wow, like as much as I thought I'd be doing this, I'm doing way more of this now, and like educating people and having empathy and trying to meet them where they're at and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, digitizing decades old processes, that's like, it is intimidating and overwhelming and scary. And I think it's our job to eliminate a lot of reflexes on that, whether it's companies that are afraid to pull the trigger on, the leadership level or the person who has to transition their job to SmartCert and still do their job and, embrace this transition with a good attitude. Our role is really to meet everyone where they're at on that. And I think it is the core tenets of change management. You don't have to talk about that as much as put people through the steps that help them build not only the acceptance, but the enthusiasm that this requires, right? Like if you're going to go from A to B, you certainly have to have the momentum to get there. And because we affect so many different departments, our focus is where do we get started? And then how do we inspire and empower using, we now have 4.5 years of experience transitioning companies. So we kind of understand what to look for. We understand how to approach onboarding and training, what tools you need. That continues to evolve and our tools get smarter. But, after 3,000 companies, there's a good number of them that are already familiar and they are ready to take that next step. And so that's also a great success story is you start in one place and you evolve into embracing that when everyone is ready, when it bubbles to the top of the priority list.
I'm actually curious if you have like a specific like customer story or something like that around where like they had this, because you talked about having like, confidence, but also getting excited about like what's going on with using your platform. Like, do you have an example of like, oh, once they saw this, they were like, oh, this is awesome. Like, do you have any examples of that?
I have a lot. I mean, one company that comes to mind when, and they were a paper-based process, when they did the math on the paper savings, just, talking about how it affects their bottom line, they were like, this is meaningful to our company. Not only is it going to save time, but literally the tens of thousands of dollars invested in paper can, be allocated elsewhere. I think those aha moments are great. But I think there's also the companies that have a goal, partner with us. And once that this is up and running, we have many companies that basically have a hands-off approach to certs now. They're integrated with the right systems. They're talking the right way. They're keeping up with our feature releases. that is that is something to be proud of for them to be willing to not only lean into what that requires, but the outcomes of that. I mentioned like there's so many companies that are trying to bridge the gap with labor shortages or gosh, I have to hire people just to push papers around. When you start to think about where people can spend their time, and if it's more from an oversight perspective than keying in data all day, that you're making an impact on the business and you're setting it up well for future growth.
I even think about just things like simple, like human error, right? Like obviously, like sometimes software makes errors too. Like, I'm actually curious, do you use like a human in the loop to verify things, or I guess how do you handle anything like that?
We definitely recommend, if we're going to extract data from a CERT and do a compliance check and automate that process, there's still a level of responsibility to ensure that data is correct. And so we want to give you the tools to do it faster. And then you're going to just review that, put your signature on it, and continue the workflow. So I think at least for now, AI makes mistakes just like everything else, like you said. But if we can make that process faster, we know we're going to be helping.
Yeah. That's crazy. I never actually thought about the reduced cost and like paper spend and things like that. I think there's just so many things across so many other industries where it's just like, well, we've always done it this way, or this is how, or like even you're talking about like, we don't have enough people to look at all these papers. Like, well, then if we're never going to find the people, what do we do? Oh, let's find a way to use technology to solve that issue.
Exactly right.
Yeah, it's crazy. So what's next for SmartCert? Like what's kind of like, whether it's on your roadmap or just where you guys see yourselves going in the next year or two, what's kind of like top of mind right now?
It's exciting. I talked about the last 4.5 years, we've focused on everyone in the supply chain, whether it's, a company of 2 people or 200 or 2,000. I mentioned they all kind of have the same goals and challenges. And so creating this network and helping create efficiencies is unlocking a lot of opportunity, but it's also now getting the attention of those at the top of the food chain, right? So the virality and the growth that we're seeing now is because these end users want to power their entire supply chain, all of their suppliers, and standardize processes in a way that's going to eliminate millions of dollars to the bottom line. If you think about having more control over what your suppliers send and the way that you consume that, the way that it powers your systems, that's the true opportunity for us. And we're finally arriving at a place where we get to have those conversations now with some pretty big players.
That's cool. That's awesome. Congrats on all your progress so far. Amazing. I feel like, everything's been falling into place at the right time for you. And it's just been cool too, to just hear your customer base growing and just everything you're learning. So congrats.
Thank you.
Do you have any advice for founders that are maybe like you and they're thinking about relocating or building, in a smaller hub like Green Bay or Wisconsin? Like any thoughts on that? Like what you've kind of learned through your transition? What would you kind of share with somebody that's thinking about doing that?
Yeah, I love that question. I definitely recommend being intentional about how you build your network, the access to resources. For Wisconsin, there's certainly a level of deep talent and a strong sense of community. But I think also a growing support system for early stage companies. You do have to be proactive. I'd say the greatest advice would be to lean into local strengths, whether that's university partnerships, the manufacturing expertise that we mentioned, but get involved and reach out. There's less noise here, but that usually means more room for focus and building something meaningful. And I think, the biggest thing to remember is you don't have to replicate what's happening in Silicon Valley. Mm-hmm. I think the best startups reflect the DNA of where they're built. And I think that's where the magic and the advantage really is for Wisconsin.
Where can people that are, listening to this or watching learn more about SmartCert, or maybe even get in touch with you if they're like, maybe they're building something similar in this industry, or maybe they're thinking about moving to Green Bay or Wisconsin? How can they get in touch?
Yeah, I'd love to be a resource for all those conversations. I'm on LinkedIn, so you can search for Lonni Kieffer. We also have SmartCert represented there and post a lot of information, whether it's use cases or the way we're approaching common problems. Our website is smartcert.tech, which also outlines a lot of different approaches. Our technology can solve problems. It's that crawl, walk, run perspective. You don't have to do it all at once, but maybe there's an opportunity to get started. And then certainly as far as any other startup founders go, always happy to have those conversations.
Thanks for joining us on the Startup Wisconsin podcast. Want to support the show? Don't forget to subscribe and get updates. If you're feeling generous, you can share, rate, and review our podcast to help others find us. All right, folks, until next time, let's keep moving Wisconsin forward.